Um, Jonathan, maybe talk a little bit about how you got to where you are.
Yeah, so just for a little bit of background, I've been at Vox Media now for I think 10 months. Before then, I was heading up global marketing over at a company called Vice, which you might be familiar with. And Vox Media is a number of things. Vox Media is a content-focused company that has parallel paths both amazing talent and powerful technology to be able to create content that is highly shareable, highly entertaining, and covers a bunch of different passion points, including technology, news, food, lifestyle, fashion. There's a number more of them as well. And so, Vox Media has been around for a number of years. And in addition to being a suite of editorial brands, we're also a full-service agency. So we take all the things that we've used to make our brand successful and work with advertisers to make their brands successful. That's everything from our approach to content creation, but also the technology and the tools and the insights and the data and the marketing know-how that we use to amplify our content to consumers. So just a little bit of background. So I'm actually not from New York at all. I grew up in Florida, in a city called Tallahassee, where I lived for about 20 years, I think. And I started out originally in high school working in radio. I produced live talk shows, AM radio, for about 6 years through high school and then college. Went to college for creative writing and film, so nothing to do with marketing at all, because I just like short fiction and poetry. So,
I might disagree with you about that later, but we'll get to that.
No, I mean there's a little bit of overlap, but started working at an agency in South Florida right after college, writing copy. And then realized that there was really nothing for me in Florida at all, so just packed things up, moved to New York, started consulting around the company a bit with a focus on social media strategy and SEO. Got really tired of that too, because agency work is kind of soulless almost, and very kind of draining. And so quit that, saw an internship over at Vice. I'd read the magazine for a long, long time, was really excited about the brand, just decided to take a chance and worked there, got a full...
A high-paying internship, I
Oh,
imagine.
of course, a very high-paying internship in PBR and parties. And so did that with a focus on ad operations, built out their ad network, which is a collection of publishers that they work with to help monetize their unsold inventory. And then, there wasn't really a marketing department there whenever I started, so I kind of was like, I want that. And so I just kind of took it, built it up, created a strategy out of it, and was there until September of last year. And then I started talking to this guy over here and our CEO, Jim Bankoff, and became instantly enamored just by the proposition of Vox Media, the fact that they've managed to create the best quality content without sacrificing technology, and creating the best technology without sacrificing the quality of the content. And there's very few media companies that I think can actually say that, except for Vox.
Wow. Lockhart, you also have kind of a history, if you will, or a CV that includes some stops at some very important publications in digital. I mean, you were at Gawker Media almost from day one.
From pretty early on, yeah.
What was that like?
Well, I'll tell you, my first
tweeted out in 140 characters.
Just so you guys know where this stuff starts. So I went to Brown, and I was a total student newspaper nerd. And I knew I wanted to work in media. I knew I wanted to be a writer. Wanted to move to New York. I moved to New York, and my first job was at a magazine long bankrupt called Wideband. It was a consumer electronics trade magazine. And I was hired as a 22-year-old and basically had to write about telecommunications, something about which I knew nothing and frankly had not a whole lot of passion for. But it was actually kind of and the office itself was on 52nd Street. Office was so terrible that we came in one day and the roof had caved in because of rain and everyone's computers were fried. Like, so this is what first jobs look like, you know? And I would say understand that that's totally cool. Like, like I look back on it now, I still have some friends I made at that job. Like, it's hilarious to think about. But what that job had that was actually really great for me is the founder of the magazine was a kind of an eccentric, like, a guy who'd been in the business of trade magazines for years. A really great publisher, was able to sort of see business opportunities and seize them. But he was also a great editor. And basically for the 2 years I worked there, I would write all these stories about things I barely understood. And this is, like, he was so old school that you would print them out and give them to them, and he would hand them back redlined. And basically, like, you would get your copy back from him, and it would look like a red pen had, like, exploded on the page. Because he was like, you know, he would just rewrite everything, and then you had to basically retype in his changes. But as a journalist starting out, it was actually a great experience because you're just getting your ass kicked on a daily basis. But you're getting your ass kicked by someone who's helping make your writing better. And if you're serious about writing, like, and you're serious about writing as a career, then, you know, the very best thing you can, I think, find in a first job is a place where you just get to write. And it doesn't really even matter what you're writing about, just the act of, like, putting words together and having someone else say to you, like, nope, that's not how you do it, or like, nope, that sentence is terrible, or like, you think this is, like, has enough sources? Because it doesn't. Like, just getting your butt kicked like that is great. And, you know, that was the start of my career. I ended up figuring out in my late 20s, I kind of got the sense that, I sort of had a choice to make. Like, do I really want to be a writer and a journalist, or, like, do I want to sort of be someone who sort of hires and works with writers and journalists? And for whatever reason, like, the path for me kind of diverged, and I sort of chose the sort of publisher route as opposed to the journalist route. And so what that did is that I ended up at Gawker when Gawker was a pretty young company. It had just been around for about a year. And I think it had 15 total employees when I joined the company. And Nick Denton, who was the founder of Gawker, I was doing a personal blog at the time and was also working at another magazine, a home and garden magazine for, like, rich people in the Hamptons. It's another great example of, like, really crappy journalism, but really great journalism experience. And Nick Denton said, like, hey, Gawker's growing. I think the stuff we're doing at Gawker is not that different from what publications have done, like, throughout, you know, the centuries. We're just doing it in a different format. We're doing it in this weblog format, like on the web. And I had experience managing writers at that point. I'd been the managing editor of this magazine for a few years. I was also a blogger in the early days of blogging, so very familiar with that whole world. And sort of my personal Venn diagram just happened to, like, hit those two things, and, you know, it worked out that I joined Gawker.
What was your blog about?
My blog was just called LockhartSteel.com. It was about, like, it was a classic, like, early 2000s era blog. It was like, I blogged about the Red Sox, and I blogged about, like, but actually what I did, one of the things I blogged about was I was living on the Lower East Side at the time. And back, like, in 2003, the Lower East Side, for you guys who weren't here in 2003, every joke you make right now, which uses Williamsburg as the punchline, that was the Lower East Side in 2003. It was like, oh, all the hipsters on the Lower East Side, and, like, this horrible new thing is happening on the Lower East Side, and, like, you know, I want to kill everyone on the Lower East Side. So I was writing about this neighborhood, and Gawker had just launched, Gawker.com had just launched, and so the original editor there, Elizabeth Spires, used to link to my blog, and that's where the idea for Curb, which is the real estate and sort of neighborhoods website that I started subsequent to my time at Gawker, it kind of grew out of my experience doing that stuff on my personal blog.
Do you think, I mean, it's interesting that in a way, both of you have sort of similar paths. I mean, Jonathan, you were obviously interested in being a writer, a poet, a filmmaker. You were, as you said, your words, you know, real newspaper nerd in college. Yeah. In order to kind of make it and stay interested now, do you need to be almost kind of like a Renaissance communications person? Do you need to be part writer, part entrepreneur, part technologist? I mean,
yes, I think that you have to have that kind of skill set. You know, I kind of always refer to those people as Swiss Army knives, almost, like people that know how to do everything. Like, if you don't have the answer, you can figure it out because Google exists, and, like, how can you not figure it out? And so I think it's that. Like, I think it's one part that, and it's one part just an unequivocal kind of desire to get things done and to win.
Yeah, we have this phrase we use at Vox a lot. It predates my time there. We call it media hacking. And the idea is that, like, you think about hacking, right? It's always used for, like, people who are programmers or, like, you know, coders. But the idea of media hacking is sort of this idea, or at least the way we talk about it, it's this idea that the tools to create are just out there right now in a way that they've never been in history. And across our company at Vox, like the people who we work with are people who sort of just seized the means of control because they wanted to create. Like Nilay Patel, he's the editor-in-chief of The Verge. The Verge is one of our 7 verticals. It's basically the topic is it's all about sort of the future and technology, but in a really, really smart way. And it has a huge audience. I mean, it reaches 25 million people a month, so extremely influential. Nilay became a lawyer. He didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. He became a lawyer, and he was a copyright lawyer of all things. And about 7 or 8 years ago, was like, you know what, this is so boring. Which, by the way, everyone I know who became a lawyer thinks that. So, pro tip, don't become a lawyer. But if you do become a lawyer, you can do what Nilay did, which was he just decided, like, I just want to start writing about this stuff. I love to write, and like, I shouldn't have become a lawyer. I should have been a writer. And so he just started blogging about like some of the things that were going on in the world of technology, and he latched on to Engadget, which is a popular gadget blog that AOL runs. Worked there, kind of worked his way up, and then a bunch of that team came over to Vox in 2011 and launched The Verge, and then Nilay was the #2 on the site for a while, and like last summer gets promoted to editor-in-chief. So it's like, and by the way, he does some of the best, because he has that background, I guess here's the one silver lining on the law thing, because he has that copyright background and knows the law so well, he does some of the best writing on the internet on things like net neutrality or any issues where sort of technology and law are like butting heads. But there you go, like Nilay just did it. Like he just decided like, I want to do this. And like, when I look at a lot of like, particularly in editorial, the kind of people that we tend to hire at Vox, usually it's people who are already doing it somehow. Like they're not waiting for permission. They're not waiting to get the job. It's like, they already have a blog. Or they're doing like, well, we hired someone at Curbed because he had the most beautiful Tumblr I've ever seen. It was just curated photos. But Curbed is a very visual site, and just looking at his Tumblr, that he was doing just for the hell of it. He didn't have an agenda. And we literally reached out to him, and I was like, well, we want to hire you. And he's like, I never thought I would work at a media company. This is so crazy. But that sort of idea of like, again, what we call media hacking, of just like putting yourself out there and like letting your work, I mean, first of all, by putting yourself out there, you're actually doing work, like you're engaged in the creative act already. And it's the rare person we hire who isn't already doing that in some way. It might, and in this day and age, it could be like a YouTube person.
It's about that too. I'm curious where you left Gawker.
Yep.
You start Curbed.
Well, yeah. So my time at Gawker, I mean, I loved working at Gawker. It was a small company. It was crazy. Nick Denton, for those of you who follow him on the internet at all, is a complete genius and also kind of a maniac. But like I loved my time there. Some people didn't. But yeah, it was a tough decision. Like I had this idea to do these sites because I did Curbed, then we launched a site called Eater, which is all about the world of like restaurants and food. Then we did a site called Racked, which is about the world of shopping.
When you say did you have some
I had
partners?
I had a couple partners on these sites, yeah.
And was there any funding, or did you just bootstrap the whole thing?
We bootstrapped the whole thing for the first couple of years, but we were helped by a really lucky factor, which helps to be lucky. And that was that we started doing Curbed, which is our real estate website, in 2004. And 2004 to 2007 was like this boom time for New York City real estate. And it was right before everything crashed, right? Real estate made everything crash, but before that, real estate would bubble everything to this crazy bubble, right? So all these developers who had no business being developers were building buildings in that era. And they tended to be younger, they tended to be more inexperienced, which is why things went so horribly wrong. But in the meantime, they were Curbed readers, and they decided they wanted to advertise with us. So the company, it's very rare that you have people coming to you in media being like, we want to advertise. Usually you go knock on a lot of doors and you
get
hear
them slammed in your face.
Yeah, you get them slammed in your face. At Curbed, we had this really lucky thing where the New York City real estate world was like, we want to put ads on Curbed. And it was like, okay. So my co-founder, this woman, Alexis Juneja, who now works with us at Vox and runs HR for Vox Media, she was working at the time at Sloan Kettering, which is the cancer hospital here in New York. She was a Harvard Business School grad, had that whole background, which is why we were a good team, because I had none of that back. Like, I always said that like I'm Microsoft Word, she's Microsoft Excel. And if you're like looking for a partner, that's a good way to do it sometimes. But what happened was she was like, okay, yeah, this is fun. Like I'm managing a $3 billion endowment as my day job. Like I'll sell $3,000 ad deals at night. And she literally was like, I can learn how to sell ads. How hard can that be? And she literally just sort of talked to some people. She put a fax machine, this is 10 years ago, we still had fax machines. She put a fax machine in the closet of her apartment, and like we started selling ads. And like that, just based on that, we were able to grow ourselves to a couple $100,000 a year in revenue. And that's in 2007. After that had been going, I woke up in 2007 and it was like, wait a sec. Like Gawker's great, working like crazy. but I have this hobby that's now like generating a few $100,000 in revenue. Like that's, and by the way, that money we weren't paying ourselves. We were using it to like invest back into the business. So like these graduates who had just graduated from UCLA urban planning in Los Angeles, they emailed me and they were like, hey, is anyone going to do a curb for Los Angeles? And I was like, I don't know. And they're like, can we do it? I'm sure. So that's how we sort of did it. There was no grand plan. It was like, it just sort of grew. But anyway, long story short, in 2007, I woke up and was like, Gawker's great, Curb is growing, I got to pick one, and I chose to do my own thing at that point.
Wow. I want to get to that kind of transition to selling to Vox and becoming part of Vox. But Jonathan, you worked in, also like Lockhart at Gawker Media, you were at Vice kind of in this, hey kids, let's get together and put on a show days. What was it like being involved in that kind of, and the people in it, and the transition to kind of a grown-up company?
Yeah,
if it ever really got there.
No. Debatable. I mean, it's kind of odd talking about 2008 as like a prehistoric era, but that's what it kind of felt like, honestly. You had this warehouse in what was still a very gentrified Williamsburg, Brooklyn, but kind of sequestered off in the northern part. It was 50 guys up on the second floor of a warehouse, like fiddling with cameras, trying to figure out what to do with it, but making incredible content for that time. And I think that as a company, Vice was in a really very interesting position where there wasn't that much great in-depth exploratory online journalism told through video format, and they kind of jumped on that. And so it was really interesting to be part of that kind of catalyst, because at that time, they had launched their now defunct VBS.TV, which was their video portal, which, so I don't know if you go like the Wayback Machine, you type in VBS.TV, you might actually find an image of it. It's like, looks like a photo of like a TV with like a video player in the middle, and have like a little like buttons that you could press. It was like the stupid.
Looks a little bit like one of these.
It looked exactly like that. And so you had your normal remote, and you can go between like shows, and it was like the worst UX in the world. But anyways, it was really interesting to be there whenever they first started investing and taking video seriously, because that's kind of the foundation of that entire company now, is a very video-centric company that creates video that can be easily distributed and watched online, but can be easily licensed to TV as well.
When Lockhart mentioned kind of this aha moment, of like, oh, wait a second, we're getting all this revenue coming in, and there are people in Los Angeles who want to license what we do and do it.
Yeah.
Was there an aha moment when you were at Vice where you said, oh man, we are on to something? Yeah,
I mean, I would say that's 2009 whenever we started working with Intel on the Creators Project program.
Right, that was your baby.
Yeah, I mean, that, yeah.
Talk a little bit about that and the genesis of it.
Yeah.
Here you are, here are you guys, a bunch of pirates in Williamsburg, and digital, you weren't pirates, I'm not insinuating any illegality, at least not of that sort.
Yeah.
And you were, and then, boom, you're dealing with Intel. I mean, talk about a blue chip company.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very fortunate time for the company because, Intel as a brand has always kind of been this very abstract concept in that they've always been an ingredient brand, right? And so whenever you go and you buy your next computer, you're buying that computer for the brand itself, or maybe even the operating system, right? Mac first PC / Windows. But you don't really go there and you're like, I want that Intel machine. And so what they wanted to do is really kind of reinvigorate the Intel brand within this 18 to 34-year-old audience within the US. And so we had piloted the program as La Créature du Futur in France, which did pretty well, and then adapted it for the US in 2010 and slowly built it up, quickly built it up into an online video platform for the intersection of creativity and technology. And it's seen extensions that have traveled around the world. It's worked with some of the most inspiring creators that I've ever met in my life. It was really amazing to be like in the same edit bay as Spike Jonze and being like, oh, cool,
wow.
like I'm actually standing next to you. I love your movies. Sign this for me. Which I didn't do, but I should have. But that was a really cool experience, and that was really, I think, that spark, for Vice that really set it apart from being, this street mag that was distributed all around New York and in some European countries, and a company that is going to North Korea and filming documentaries there, to a company that could take all of that and then work with some of the biggest brands, the coolest brands in the world, and kind of replicate that same success.
Both of you made, I mean, you probably could tell like Gawker and Vice horror stories from here into eternity, but I think I really want to talk about what's going on in here and now at Vox Media. And I'm curious, I mean, both of you made big decisions. You were in a senior position at Vice, doing some incredibly creative work, a company that's, I mean, they got all the, like, white heat behind it and some serious funding. You've got your own successful media company. I mean, and you're the big cheese, the Grand Queso, and both of you made this decision to go with this company called Vox. Maybe you want to talk about making that, how you make that decision. I mean.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your decision predates me, so.
Okay, sure.
You go first.
So anyway, Curbed. In 2007, when I left Gawker, we decided we wanted to do Curbed seriously, and we raised $1.5 million in seed financing, which we can talk about how to do that. That's a whole different world of pain. But that's the only money we ever raised, which actually is like a relatively small amount of money in this sort of game. And we grew ourselves to about 50 employees. We had an office right over on Cooper Square, so we were right in the neighborhood here. And I think our sites had grown to a really nice level. We had a nice audience, and we had great people working for us. But at the same time, companies like Vice and companies like Vox and companies like BuzzFeed were raising tens of millions of dollars in venture capital. And I started to feel a little bit like, hey, we're no longer like a little mom and pop blog. Like, if you guys like read like Gothamist, for instance, like Gothamist is a great little team of people. They do great stuff, but like it's a tiny little company and based in Dumbo. They're not trying to be something much bigger than that. They're self-sufficient and like that's awesome. And we weren't quite Gothamist. We were a little more ambitious than that, but we also didn't have the ability or the cash or the fundraising skills. And you need those skills if you really want to create something gigantic. Like our CEO, Jim Bankoff at Vox, like he's amazing at a lot of things, but boy, is he good at fundraising. And like it's a real skill. You just either sort of you have it or you don't. And so I realized this sort of in 2012, 2013, companies growing, but like maybe we're going to get kind of caught in the middle was sort of my fear. Like we were never going to be small enough to just be what they call lifestyle business. We were never going to be maybe big enough to be competing with the people who we looked like we might have to compete with. And like what if Vox Media decided to launch its own food site? Like what happens to Eater then? And so Jim Bankoff and I had met each other at a few different conferences, and he basically said to me, like, because we were thinking about trying to raise some more money, and Jim was like, listen, why don't you not raise more money? How about Vox acquires your company? And frankly, it was a shocking idea. I wasn't looking to sell the company. But there's a saying that's said a lot in the world, in the sort of venture capital and media world, which is the idea that companies are bought, not sold. Which is to say, like, you're better off selling your company if that's something that's going to happen when someone approaches you, as opposed to you being like, hey, anyone want to buy us? Like, when you're like, hey, anyone want to buy us? People are like, whoa, what's wrong over there? Like, I don't want that. It signals that you're damaged. Whereas in this case, Jim approached us and was like, listen, we want to buy you. And it was like, wow, that's a mind-blowing idea. And what sealed the deal for me was in sort of your question of like, why choose Vox? And I did sort of give up being like the CEO of this 50-person company to become like, a senior leader, but not the CEO of a much larger company. There were sort of two main factors. One was that Jim promised to me that he really loved, so Vox and Curb both had the same idea, which was let's build these incredibly strong brands. And you might think of them as websites, but we see them now as like living on every platform. So it's like if you're a fan of Eater, hopefully you're on our site, but hopefully you're also following our Instagram, and hopefully you're engaging with us on Facebook or Twitter. And if you love food video, hopefully you're watching us on YouTube. It's like Eater is a brand. It should be like a food brand for this next generation. Like if the Food Network is sort of like a brand for like our parents' generation, hopefully Eater is more a brand for like our generation. And Jim said, listen, let's invest in these brands. Let's build your editorial teams. Like I'll give you resources. And that's one of the things about Vox Media that's really cool is like we have a CEO who loves investing in journalism and just like wants to fund great creators. So that's awesome. So that was like, okay, well, that's really cool. That makes me happy. And the second thing was, and we touched on this at the beginning, and it's worth a bit of a deeper dive, although I'm not going to go on at length about it now, but Vox has built this incredible technology platform. It's called Chorus. And it's basically what we use to publish not just our websites, but kind of our content all across the web. And building really good technology at a media company is really hard. And the reason is that most great coders don't want to work in a media company. They want to go work for Facebook, they want to go work for Twitter, they want to go work for whatever. Like, they're more interesting places to work generally when you're someone who really is a great coder. Except Vox Media. Vox is really the exception in this regard, really across our whole industry. Well, maybe BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed has some pretty good tech too. But Vox and BuzzFeed are the two media companies that really smart technologists also want to work at. And what that's allowed Vox to do, and we do this on all of our sites, is do some pretty incredible storytelling where we merge what we do editorially with what we do with things like video, with what we do with things like what we call product, which is sort of the look and feel of the sites. And it gives us the ability to do things that are just prettier, more mind-blowing, and better than what everyone else is doing. And when I thought about sort of, hey, we're going to invest in these brands that I've built, and we're going to have the power of Vox's technology platform behind us, that was my decision.
And why did you believe Jim? We
Well,
know all sorts of stories.
That's a totally fair question. I mean, I think like anytime you're making a decision, which for me is going to be one of the big decisions in my life, like really it was just about trust. Like I'd gotten to know Jim, and I, had a ton of, we talked. It took 6 months to get the deal done. If you ever want to sell, if you ever end up with a company and you're thinking of selling it, like it will take the rest of your life. I mean, it just does. Like it's one of those things that seems like it should take 5 minutes, but it takes a year. In our case, it took 6 months. So there's a lot of back and forth, Jim and I negotiating a lot of things, but a lot of it's feel. Like, at the end of the day, Jim was giving us some cash for the company and some stock in Vox Media for the company, so I knew I was getting those things. Something like Jim saying, I promise I'm going to invest more in your brands, that wasn't in writing. Like, I mean, we could have joined Vox and Jim would have been like, psych, but like, I just had the sense that that wouldn't have made any sense. He was paying a fair amount of money for our company, and it would make sense to invest in our brands, to grow them. And to Jim's credit, and this is part of what makes me very happy to go to work every day, he was true to every promise. And these are promises which all we really had to go on there was a handshake. But he's the kind of guy where I just trusted his handshake, and I so far I've been vindicated by that.
Great. Jonathan, again, you were in I would think, a pretty cozy situation,
Yep.
and it was a chance probably to make a living and enjoy doing it, and,
Yep.
and to kind of spread your creative wings, both as a business person and as just a creative, really.
Yeah, I mean, you said the word cozy, and I think that almost has a little bit to do with it, to be honest with you. I had been at Vice for 6 years. I had gotten to a certain position, done a lot of amazing things, helped build a team that was just, at one point, a kid posting on social and a kid pitching Pitchfork nonstop every single day, to an international team of 70 people in 10 different markets, which was exciting. At the
So
same,
you were pitching Pitchfork the music.
yeah,
Well,
exactly, yeah. Which was exciting. At the same time, there's something to be said about getting almost too cozy and comfortable, and there's something to be said about wanting to advance your career in a different way and seeing new opportunities. I wasn't actively looking for a new position, but Locke and I started talking for a long time, and he kind of sold me on the Vox Media proposition, idea that he just sold everybody here on, and he wasn't wrong. And what I saw in Vox Media was a company that had some of the most intelligent and creative talent that I admire and have read for a long, long time, an amazing product platform for storytelling and distribution and insights, and a great senior leadership there. And the decision for me was a no-brainer. Vox Media at the time, whenever I joined, there wasn't really a formalized marketing department. Jim Bankoff, our CEO, was essentially doing his own PR, which is crazy for a CEO to be responding to ad week requests, but he was. And so I saw the opportunity to do a lot of what I had built up within Vice and do that at Vox Media. And it's still a scrappy marketing department, but it's going to grow over the next year, and it's still going to get even kind of meaner and more aggressive. And the great thing is that there's so many amazing assets and talents to work with within Vox that make my job easy.
It seems that we're at a real interesting time. I mean, and I want to talk about, you guys to talk a little bit about how this works inside Vox. You're on the marketing side, you're on the editorial side. you know, I come from the kind of legacy media world where, I mean, everything was contempt and suspicion of, you know, the business side, of the technology side, of the marketing side, the editorials. You know, we were the editorial guys. You know, watch out for them.
Yep.
I think that we see in these kind of a lot of the successful new media companies, it seems that there's this sense of church and state can work pretty well together. I'm just kind of curious how that works and how you keep the integrity of both sides.
Yeah, I think you're probably better suited.
So
to
I
answer
mean,
this one.
I have strong feelings on this topic. So yeah, this idea of church and state is a fundamental train of thought in journalism, right? Which is the idea that like we have to be able to do the journalism we need to do, and it shouldn't be influenced by what's happening on the sales side. And what's great, another great thing about our CEO at Vox is that that's exactly what Vox is. So an example of this is that Comcast Ventures is one of our major venture investors. They put a ton of money into Vox Media. And Comcast, the cable company, is one of our biggest advertisers, or at least on The Verge. The Verge did a series of stories last summer about Comcast, which culminated in a story with the headline, "Is Comcast the worst company in America?" And like, guess what? That was totally fine. Like, that's the kind of work that we should be allowing, and like, we're never gonna like let the business decisions like overrule the editorial decisions there. And in the same way, we create a lot of sponsored content now, but it is a separate team, and you can talk a little about Vox Creative, but it's a separate team of people who are doing it. The people who are on our editorial side are not the ones tasked with creating content. It blows my mind that companies like Condé Nast and places like that are now saying like, oh yeah, editorial people will create content for brands. Like, I don't think that's a good idea. I mean, I think in fact it's an absolutely terrible idea because that does erode that wall. Now that being said, what I would say has changed, I think, in the digital generation of media is that because there's that wall, and just because you're on the journalism side of it, because let's say you're on the journalism side of it, doesn't mean you have the right to be ignorant about how business works. In fact, like you should, the editors-in-chief, the way our sites work at Vox is each of our sites has a really strong editor-in-chief who runs it. So I mentioned Nilay Patel, he's the editor-in-chief of The Verge. Amanda Clute is the editor of Eater, you know, to name 2 of our 7. Both Nilay and Amanda have to manage their teams as a business. And like that's not the same thing as influencing what you write, but it does mean being aware of like what things cost, what the marketplace is going to value you at in terms of like what kind of salaries you're expected to pay. You have to be smart about that stuff. And everyone on the team, Jim as our CEO, is really good about sharing a lot of data about the company with everybody. So it's like, hey, look at here are the numbers we did in sales last quarter. Not to scare you, not because you necessarily need to know, but because like, hey, you're part of this company, and it's interesting to know. It's interesting to know how we make money. And I think that's a change that is a fundamentally good change. And I would say that just because you're a journalist or just because you're on that side of the equation, like the era of being able to just be ignorant about business, like that's not my thing, I don't need to know about business, like that era is over. And like that's a really good thing, and we should all embrace that because it's a really exciting time to be growing these companies. And the way Vox is growing, we're all like tracking it. Like we have successes and we have failures, and we're pretty open about talking about all of them. But as a journalist, it's no longer good enough, in my mind, to be like, that's not my thing.
Some ideas of how it works from your side of the...
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is, you know, the industry is constantly telling brands that they have to behave like media companies and think like media companies, even be media companies. And so what do? They're like, oh, well, Vox is a media company. I want to work with them to become a media company. Well, intro Vox Creative. So Vox Creative is our separate agency arm, which, you know, takes a lot of kind of like the know-how and the tools and the best practices that we've developed from our own brands and applies that to our advertisers' brands. So, you know, giving them a creative perspective, giving them storytelling capabilities, giving them a distribution platform, giving them PR and marketing resources. You know, we have a massive marketing engine, i.e. Vox Media, which, you know, cumulatively, you know, or altogether reaches about 160 million unique visitors every single month. Whenever you look at the social reach of that, that's 530 million users reached every single month. And so it's a massive opportunity for any brand who really wants to kind of like dip their toe in that content creation space and really think of themselves as a content creator and a content media company to do just that. And so that's kind of the proposition that we're able to offer them is, you know, something that I mentioned a little bit before is like, you know, we genuinely do create some of the best content in the world, and we have some of the best platform and product in the world. And so those are two powerful tools that any brand could potentially come and work with us on to recreate some of our own success.
I would think too that the data that this platform allows you to have about who these audiences are for these seven titles, and where they and where there's, you talked earlier, you were talking about the Venn diagram with that,
Yeah.
where where curved and the verge overlap, or or box over. I mean, and to be able to share that and kind of give and know when the advertiser comes to you, to be the advertiser being able to say to you, we want to reach, we think this is who the target is for us. How can you help us get there?
Yeah, I mean, and that's exactly it. Is like, for the longest time, publishers are pitching the size of their audience, the size of their audience, the size of their audience, and like size is amazing because it guarantees you reach, but who exactly are you reaching? And so, the thing that we've started digging into, and what is completely validating once we dug into the data, is that yes, we have a massive audience and a lot of reach, but the quality and composition of our audience is almost far superior to a lot of our peers in the industry. On average, our audience across Fox Media is highly affluent, highly educated. 25% of them have actually attended grad school. They have a high purchase power. All of these things that a lot of advertisers are asking more and more to reach, we have that. And so the ability to target those audiences is something that this technology also allows us to do. So it's not just us pushing content with the hope that it actually hits one or two of those people out of the 10, but that it hits all 10 of them.
How does in a sense, you both are talking about how Jim Bankoff, the CEO, is very open and very transparent about whether it's what you're doing business-wise, technology-wise, that I assume with this data. How does that inform decisions you make as an editor
So we
about
like
your
to,
audience?
Well, we like to be data. We talk a lot about being data aware at Vox. We don't want to be data we don't want to make every decision just based on data. Otherwise, we may as well be robots, and we actually don't want to do that. Like, we believe in some of the journalism we're going to do because we really believe in that journalism, even if we know that it's not going to be probably going to be the thing that gets the biggest traffic that week, right? But each site has growth goals as well. So it's a balancing act, basically. But what's great is to be in a company where that kind of experimentation is encouraged. Not everything is meant to be a viral hit. Like, if all we were trying to do was produce viral hits, we would be a different media company.
Right. I guess before we go to questions from the audience, and we are going to get to your questions, ask you both quickly, in your experience at Vox, what's been the biggest success / surprise, and the other thing that you thought, man, that would just be a home run, and didn't quite happen, or worse?
I think the fact that, so how do I answer this without being too offensive? There are a lot of media companies in our industry that elevate editorial over product, or product over editorial, or marketing is somewhere in there, but there's never an equal playing field across the board. That was what was surprising to me, is that Vox Media is a very product-focused culture, but they don't sacrifice the editorial for the product. They work in harmony, and our approach to marketing and audience development and distribution is becoming more and more of an important strategy within that kind of what is now a trifecta of distribution, editorial, and product. And so that was kind of like nice and comforting, and one of the reasons why I came over is one was not superior over the other. Everybody was very unprecious about the fact that we all have to work to the common goal of creating one massive, awesome media company. And I'm not going to be precious about my head count or this or that, because all we want to do is just win and be as big as possible.
Yeah, I would build on that. I think that's a great point. And I was speaking at a technology conference in London yesterday. One of the questions from the audience was is Vox Media a media company, or is it a technology company? And what I said is, but we see ourselves really as a technology company first. And I think that's really an important differentiator for us. It also says a lot about the culture of the company. We're all working together as a team where collaboration is real and not just a buzzword. Like, that's really how it is working at Vox. And I think the big challenge is just to make sure as we grow, and we're growing pretty quickly, is just to preserve that, because the culture is the whole thing. It's the glue that holds it all together. And without the culture, like, the company is nothing.
Well, I'm sure we got some questions out there in the audience.
My name is Priyanka, and I'm an associate producer at Brooklyn Independent Media. You guys keep talking about collaborating between marketing and editorial, but how involved is marketing in editorial? Because I work in a company where I'm fighting constantly with my marketing team. I love them, but it's just like there's a lot of angry emails back and forth. But I guess my question is, like, I'm a huge fan of Vox. Like, who comes up with the tweets? Like, is it the journalists? Is it not?
Yeah, I can answer that. So the very quick answer is the journalists own the social channels. I mean, almost exclusively. So the way we see it is, like, everyone who works at our company is a social media person. We have social teams for each of our brands, but each reporter is pretty much their own, like, best Twitter or Facebook person as well. So they're the ones, and that's I think the only really way to be genuine about it. The way we work with, like, Jonathan's team is more like, let's say, like, The Verge, for instance, last week. The Verge was one of the very few publications to get an advanced version of the Apple Watch. Like, before it was released, it was like, and Nilay Patel, the editor-in-chief, like, I mean, this is kind of great. Like, he had to, like, meet up with the Apple person. It's like straight out of, like, a James Bond movie. And the Apple person's like, walk with me. And they just start walking. And, like, somewhere on the walk, like, they pass off the box which has the Apple Watch in it to Nilay, and because it was a week before the watch comes out, and they're like, don't. And so anyway, that just is hilarious, right? But that's an example of something where what The Verge did, this incredible, and Nilay built this review, which is part video and part text. I urge you guys to check it out, because it's a perfect example of the kind of storytelling we do. Just if you Google, like, Verge Apple Watch review, you'll see it. It's an incredible creation. And it is what collaboration at Vox is all about, because there was a collaboration of the product team to build this incredible template which really intermixes video and text in a really, really cool way. But then we know that we're going to drop this review. The embargo came off on, like, last Tuesday, and so we're going to drop this review. Well, we know that the Verge fanboys are going to go crazy for this, that's going to happen no matter what. But this deserves a much bigger audience. So that's when we can go, or the Verge team can go to Jonathan's team and be like, hey, let's get some marketing muscle around this. Like, then where did you take it from there?
Yeah, so that's the thing is like, it's best to think of marketing within the context of a media company as being a resource, like an amplification machine. Like, our goal is to help our talent and our brands be impossible to ignore, to be everywhere. And really just, like, making sure that rather than launching and just, like, throwing something out there and hoping that it sticks and gets seen by people, that, like, it's very calculated and, like, it's very mathematical. It's all a chess game. Like, every single thing ladders up to another thing, ladders up to another thing, ladders up to another thing, and then it launches. And then finding then cultural hooks later on to reactivate that thing, because like, as a company, we invest a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in creating the best possible thing, and there's no reason why it can't be seen more than once. And so that's how we kind of work together, both editorial and marketing, to bring something to market and make sure that it gets seen by as many people as possible.
We can give you other examples, but the technology that we've built is truly great. But at the risk of repeating ourselves, it's also the ability of the teams to really work together. And that Apple Watch review is an example of a place where the technology team and the journalists really come together. And in a lot of other media companies I've worked at, it seems like it should be really easy. It can be really hard. Like some of the old line media companies, like Time or places like that, like, they still see the technologists as, like, the IT department. It's like their job is, like, to build the websites and fix the printer, right? Like, that's not what people who work in technology at Vox Media do. Like, I have to fix the printer.
A question down here.
Hi, my name is Shadi. I'm in a graduate program for international affairs, and I work in social media. So I'm really interested to hear what Vox's role and responsibility, if you feel it has any, is on the digital media landscape.
Yeah, I mean, to best answer that question, we feel that it's our responsibility to be in as many places as possible. I think I mentioned it a few questions back, but we take a very agnostic, non-precious approach to getting in front of the right audience at the right time in the right place. And that could happen anywhere, and it could happen in any format. We're also not very precious about content formats too. Like, yes, video is nice and it's very entertaining and it's very interactive and it's something that is often elevated as a very premium asset, but at the same time, stories can also be told in GIF formats. They can be told in vines. They can be told in cinemagraphs. They can be told in infographics. There's a million different ways to communicate an idea. And so, our job is to find the best way to communicate that idea on the platform through which we're distributing. And if we don't do that, then it's not going to distribute and it's not going to be seen by anybody, and we fail.
I would just say, like, in terms of social media, we're talking a lot about social media as marketing, which it is good for. All of our journalists also, I think, have now used social media as a major way they do their reporting. And I think that's like, if you're just seeing Twitter or Facebook as like a way to get the message out, it's also a way to find your stories. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was just watching someone on the Verge team a few days ago on Twitter is having like a back and forth conversation with like the CEO of T-Mobile. Like, that's pretty cool. And like, if you're an eater editor and you're not following the Twitter feeds of all these chefs and restaurants, well, then you're missing out on a huge news source. So for us, I think social is just as much like a part of our reporters' daily lives in terms of breaking the news as it is then announcing that we've broken the news.
All right, well, before we wrap up, I'm going to ask each of you kind of maybe in, 140 characters or less, but advice for all these really engaged, what we like to call them inspired influencers who are hoping to, follow similar paths to you.
Sure, I would just say like what I said at the beginning, which is like, be a creator. Like, be in the YouTube studio right now. Be updating your personal blog. Like, be out there, because people like me, when we look at who we want to hire, we're going to look at people who've already done something, didn't ask for permission, and just did it. And that kind of passion is what we're trying to tap into at our company. We're not looking for people who are just looking for a job. We want people who love this stuff, and I think that's what comes through on our sites is like, you're reading SB Nation, it's like, my God, these people are the craziest sports fans. Yes, that's who we want to hire.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, you just took my answer, but...
I paused to let you go first.
No,
I have a feeling he does that a lot.
Maybe I can reorder your answer and make it unique. I was going to say, love what you do. Don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. Like, we all had to do it. I mean, he was writing for a trade mag, and I was like working an unpaid internship and like living somewhere deep in Bushwick and like not paying rent. And so like, you know what? Like, perseverance does pay off. And if you're passionate about what you do and you love what you do, like, that's going to be recognized. Like people don't do good work and not get recognized for it.
Yeah.
And so, it's always going to stand out, 100%. If you're good at what you do, it'll pay off, and just continue doing it.
Jonathan Lockhart, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Jonathan, maybe talk a little bit about how you got to where you are.
Yeah, so just for a little bit of background, I've been at Vox Media now for I think 10 months. Before then, I was heading up global marketing over at a company called Vice, which you might be familiar with. And Vox Media is a number of things. Vox Media is a content-focused company that has parallel paths both amazing talent and powerful technology to be able to create content that is highly shareable, highly entertaining, and covers a bunch of different passion points, including technology, news, food, lifestyle, fashion. There's a number more of them as well. And so, Vox Media has been around for a number of years. And in addition to being a suite of editorial brands, we're also a full-service agency. So we take all the things that we've used to make our brand successful and work with advertisers to make their brands successful. That's everything from our approach to content creation, but also the technology and the tools and the insights and the data and the marketing know-how that we use to amplify our content to consumers. So just a little bit of background. So I'm actually not from New York at all.
I ended up figuring out in my late 20s, I kind of got the sense that, oh, I sort of had a choice to make. Like, do I really want to be a writer and a journalist, or like, do I want to sort of be someone who sort of hires and works with writers and journalists? And for whatever reason, like the path for me kind of diverged, and I sort of chose the sort of publisher route as opposed to the journalist route. And so what that did is that I ended up at Gawker when Gawker was a pretty young company. It had just been around for about a year. And I think it had 15 total employees when I joined the company. And Nick Denton, who was the founder of Gawker, I was doing a personal blog at the time and was also working at another magazine, a home and garden magazine for like rich people in the Hamptons. It's another great example of like really crappy journalism, but really great journalism experience. And Nick Denton said like, hey, Gawker's growing. I think the stuff we're doing at Gawker is not that different from what publications have done like throughout the centuries. We're just doing it in a different format. We're doing it in this weblog format like on the web. And I had experience managing writers at that point. I'd been the managing editor of this magazine for a few years. I was also a blogger in the early days of blogging, so very familiar with that whole world. And sort of my personal Venn diagram just happened to like hit those two things, and it worked out that I joined Gawker.
What was your blog about?
My blog was just called LockhartSteel.com. It was about like it was a classic like early 2000s era blog. It was like I blogged about the Red Sox, and I blogged about like, but actually what I did, one of the things I blogged about was I was living on the Lower East Side at the time. And back like in 2003, the Lower East Side, for you guys who weren't here in 2003, every joke you make right now.
I grew up in Florida, in a city called Tallahassee, where I lived for about 20 years, I think. And I started out originally in high school working in radio. I produced live talk shows, AM radio, for about 6 years through high school and then college. Went to college for creative writing and film, so nothing to do with marketing at all, because I just like short fiction and poetry. So,
I might disagree with you about that later, but we'll get to that.
No, I mean there's a little bit of overlap, but started working at an agency in South Florida right after college, writing copy. And then realized that there was really nothing for me in Florida at all, so just packed things up, moved to New York, started consulting around the company a bit with a focus on social media strategy and SEO. Got really tired of that too, because agency work is kind of soulless almost, and very kind of draining. And so quit that, saw an internship over at Vice. I'd read the magazine for a long, long time, was really excited about the brand, just decided to take a chance and worked there, got a full...
A high-paying internship, I
Oh,
imagine.
of course, a very high-paying internship in PBR and parties. And so did that with a focus on ad operations, built out their ad network, which is a collection of publishers that they work with to come and help monetize.
But it was actually kind of and the office itself was on 52nd Street. Office was so terrible that we came in one day and the roof had caved in because of rain, and everyone's computers were fried. Like, so this is what first jobs look like, and I would say understand that that's totally cool. Like, like I look back on it now, I still have some friends I made at that job. Like, it's hilarious to think about. But what that job had that was actually really great for me is the founder of the magazine was a kind of an eccentric, like, a guy who'd been in the business of trade magazines for years. A really great publisher, was able to sort of see business opportunities and seize them. But he was also a great editor. And basically for the 2 years I worked there, I would write all these stories about things I barely understood. And this is like, he was so old school that you would print them out and give them to them, and he would hand them back redlined. And basically, like, you would get your copy back from him, and it would look like a red pen had like exploded on the page, because he was like, he would just rewrite everything, and then you had to basically retype in his changes. But as a journalist starting out, it was actually a great experience because you're just getting your ass kicked on a daily basis. But you're getting your ass kicked by someone who's helping make your writing better. And if you're serious about writing, and you're serious about writing as a career, then the very best thing you can, I think, find in a first job is a place where you just get to write. And it doesn't really even matter what you're writing about, just the act of like putting words together and having someone else say to you like, nope, that's not how you do it, or like, nope, that sentence is terrible, or like, you think this is like has enough sources, because it doesn't. Like, just getting your butt kicked like that is great. And that was the start of my career.
Their unsold inventory. And then, there wasn't really a marketing department there whenever I started, so I kind of was like, I want that. And so I just kind of took it, built it up, created a strategy out of it, and was there until September of last year. And then I started talking to this guy over here and our CEO, Jim Bankoff, and became instantly enamored just by the proposition of Vox Media, the fact that they've managed to create the best quality content without sacrificing technology, and creating the best technology without sacrificing the quality of the content. And there's very few media companies that I think can actually say that, except for Vox.
Wow. Lockhart, you also have kind of a history, if you will, or a CV that includes some stops at some very important publications in digital. I mean, you were at Gawker Media almost from day one.
From pretty early on, yeah.
What was that like? And
Well, I'll tell you, my first
tweet it out in 140
well,
characters.
just so you guys know where this stuff starts. So I went to Brown, and I was a total student newspaper nerd, and I knew I wanted to work in media. I knew I wanted to be a writer. Wanted to move to New York. I moved to New York, and my first job was at a magazine long bankrupt called Wideband. It was a consumer electronics trade magazine, and I was hired as a 22-year-old, and basically had to write about telecommunications, something about which I knew nothing, and frankly had not a whole lot of passion for.